summertime, and you drive from Ohio?
Indiana.
What did I say, Ohio?
I don't know.
Indiana to Wisconsin. What is in your head?
I mean, the traffic and construction in and around Chicago is lovely this time of year.
My gosh. You can put that on the board. Ellipsis, yes. He's the only probably one.
Yeah,
As your White Sox fan. Well, hello.
Allegedly.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Dan Schmidt. This is Trent Marsh, good friend of ours with Riton Optics. Trent, thanks for driving up today. You got to see some scenery. You got to experience some humidity.
It's better here than it is at home. So
Is it really?
I drove north for the escape a little bit. It's only like 82 and 70 dew point here. It's considerably worse at home.
Is it really?
Yeah.
How are things shaping up by you? We've had tons of rain this summer. How are things shaping up by you guys?
We had a very, 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 very wet spring.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had a little dry period. Crops got in the ground. And then it got wet and some stuff got flooded out. And now it's dried up again. But honestly, I mean, things are looking pretty good. We had big heat running into 4th of July. And all that late corn just kind of took that humidity and took right off. Most of it's tasseling right now. Farmers I've talked to are relatively happy around me with how that, considering how late everything went into the ground. I think they were a little concerned that it was going to get really dry really quick, but it stayed fairly wet. But it's, all things considered, it's not too bad, but if it dries out right now, as late as the beans went in, I think it'll be a problem for some beans. But
what's your deer situation? How is the population looking? I can't remember now. I should know that because you used to, or I shouldn't say, you live where Schlender used to live. That part of Indiana. How's the deer population doing?
It's down from kind of the peak, kind of the heyday of 15 years ago or so. It's still pretty good. I think. When we've talked about Indiana turkeys in the past, we've talked about that like Swiss cheese population effect where you go to this property and you could kill 3 toms every year for a decade, never have a problem. And you can go 2 miles down the road and you could sit there and call for a month and never hear a gobble. Seeing some of that with the deer population, the Indiana license structure, which I am happy to rail about at any given time, has the volume of doe tags that were made available starting in the early 2000s and really up until just a handful of years ago really allowed guys to just fill tags just because. And while there's great organizations like Hunters Feeding the Hungry and that kind of thing, I think you had a lot of guys that were just kind of taking deer just to take deer, and they were, well, I'm donating them, and that's great, but when you're just doing it just to fill tags, you're not really paying attention to, okay, now I'm seeing fewer deer on trail cameras or, whatever the case may be. I think we've overpressured it a little bit.
That's
in some
the
spots.
Same here, and that's the same throughout the Midwest. The Southeast has the problem. Now you get south of Tennessee. Tennessee's got their own issues, but you get south of Tennessee, they've seen that not only catch up to them, but now with their high coyote populations, it's made it worse, and it's kept it down. Mm-hmm. And we have that in the upper Great Lakes in the northern Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, with wolves. People don't want to claim, they don't want to admit that, but it's true. Mm-hmm. And then black bear populations as well have taken what we've done like that, hammer a population down. And now you're kind of sitting there like, I like that term. I don't think I've ever heard that before. Swiss cheese effect, which is true. It's true here. And this is like epic, like bow hunting county in America, Waupaca County, Wisconsin. And it's true everywhere else. But you personally have had some pretty good spots to hunt there.
I have lucked into some decent spots in the past from time to time, in a dry patch at the moment. But I mean, what
was that last one you shot? 2 years ago?
It's 2020.
It's been 4 years already?
4 years, yeah.
Monster buck. Tell us that story quick.
So, there's a property that The south side of it is railroad tracks, and there's a little kind of clump of woods right along the railroad tracks that 2 or 3 different doe groups use as primary bedding area. So typically we don't see a lot of bucks on that property through the summer, every so often, but not often. But then once we start getting into October, November, and rut starts heating up, they're in there, because if you hunt where the does are at, the bucks will show up. So Indiana rifle opener, we had a southeast wind, which is not typical at all, but it was perfect to be able to sit a stand right on top of that kind of core bedding area. So snuck in there very early, got up. So it wasn't even sunrise yet. It was about 15 minutes after shooting light opened, and where I was sitting, behind me was a gas line cut, and I heard something step into the gas line cut. It was frosty and one of those crunchy mornings. So I looked over my right shoulder, and I could see a deer in the cut. And by the time I looked over my left shoulder, he had already covered the ground and was in the little, he was through the cut and in the woods where I was at, and he saw me kind of peek around the edge of the tree. All I could tell was that it's a buck. I couldn't move because he picked me off. I could see it. So I'm sitting there and I'm waiting, and I just look like a big fat raccoon hanging off the side of the tree. And he kind of steps closer, did that 2 or 3 different times, and just kind of kept looking up at me, and I'm trying not to move, just looking out the corner of my eye. And I can tell it's a really good deer. I can tell it's a really good deer, but that's all I can tell. He got as close as 11 yards.
Dang.
And originally had popped up basically straight downwind of me. Got as close as 11 yards and just looked right, stared a hole.
Was he doing that like head bob thing, like snapping his head up, or just staring at you?
He would look at me because he saw me come around the edge of the tree, and he would look at that bedding area, and then he'd look at me, and then he'd look at that bedding area, and he would take a couple steps, and then he'd check me again. And I mean, I'm tucked up in a kind of a V'd maple tree in kind of a dry swamp, and I'm just sitting there, not moving. But the sun wasn't up yet. It was still kind of that. So I that's all I can figure is he thought I was just a big fat raccoon sitting on the side of this tree. And eventually then he made the determination, all right, I'm headed for that bedding area. And he quartered just slightly away and cleared a couple trees and got to 25 yards. I shot him. He dropped.
I can't remember. Was that a shotgun?
It was a 30-30 lever action.
That's
my
right,
grandpa's
okay.
30-30 lever action. Dropped, hit the ground, and at that point then I got the binoculars up and looked, and the way he was laying, his right beam was up, and he had about a 3-inch kicker coming off the right main beam that I could see, and I was like, oh my.
Wow.
What exactly
We've shared
did
pictures.
I just shoot? Yeah.
Ian's got to put the picture up here for those of you watching the video version of this, but for those who are listening, how big was this again?
I've got him 3/8 shy of 180.
180.
Yeah. Mainframe 10.
I can see the picture of you holding him and smiling.
Yeah.
I remember it.
I mean, he's worth smiling over.
Yeah.
He at one point in Velvet, he was a mainframe 10 that the frame itself measured in the 17, right at like 168 or so. But he had his right side as I shot him. He's a triple brow tine. And his left side looks like a double, but he actually broke off. So he was a matching triple brow tine mainframe 10 with main beam kickers on the outside. So he broke off the main beam kicker in Velvet on the left antler. And after it was hard bone, he broke off the front and the back of the triple brow tine on his left side.
Had you guys known about this deer?
No, we had one picture of this deer on a cell cam 4 days before I shot him. That was the only. There were 4 cellular trail cameras on an 80-acre property for 8 months.
And had you gotten that photo before you went hunting?
Yes.
Okay, so you actually did know the deer was there.
Did know the deer, and talking to the guy that I hunted with, we looked at that picture and said he's probably 150s pushing 160. Because when you look at the deer and when you see the picture up, like there's nothing about him that's like.
Right.
Like, wow. Like, he doesn't have a 16-inch G2 or anything crazy like that, right? But He had one mass measurement that came in under 5 inches, and his shortest tine is like 6 1/4. So it's just
solid.
The
all the way through.
totality of it's so balanced that it doesn't look as crazy big as it is because it's there. But then you start, okay, it's 24-inch main beams, and it's a mainframe 10, and he's got tines at 9 inches and nothing shorter than 6, and all the mass measurements are 5, and then you toss in a little bit of junk because nets are for fishing, and you've got just shy of 180.
I mean, you're looking at, what are you looking at? You're looking at 5 times 420. You're looking at 40 inches of mass. I mean, that's one heck of a buck, man. Yeah. You'll hunt the rest of your life and not shoot one like that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Awesome deer. Well, thanks for sharing that. I remembered, I think we actually ran that in the magazine.
Yeah, we did a story on it.
But it was, I just remember when you shot it, and I thought for whatever reason, I'm like, oh, that was just 2 years ago. Okay, well, that's going to lead us into this talk because we're talking, actually a follow-up story on that. Is Indiana, it used to be shotgun only, as did Illinois, as did Iowa. Now you can use straight walls in Indiana?
No, so straight walls you can only use straight wall rifles on public ground. On private ground now,
really,
we're basically open for whatever.
On private ground you can use whatever.
Private ground is whatever. So like that buck that I killed in 2020 was a 30-30 lever action, but 308, 30-06.
So you can basically take any rifle you want. Now I don't know. I know these rules are changing fast. We used to have half our counties here in Wisconsin were shotgun only. That's changed. You can use rifles. Illinois, you cannot.
I think there's still some shotgun only counties.
Shotgun only is when I've hunted. And anybody who's listening, please just put it in the comments so we can educate everybody who's listening. Because it is changing. I know Iowa has changed where you can use straight walls. And we've had JJ on. We've talked about the advancements in the ammunition, especially for guys who are shooting. I shot a lever action 357. I was hunting with Federal Premium a couple of years ago, and with the new ammo, you can really shoot. And then what we're talking about now is you put good optics on them. Yeah, are you going to be shooting 300-400 yards? No, not with a lever action, but I'm not anyways.
But so there's so few places in Indiana to shoot that far anyway.
Right.
Like that's the other part of it is.
Or if you're a bow hunter like me, that's foreign. Like,
and that stand that I killed that deer in, it was set up as a bow stand. And if you're a bow hunter and a gun hunter, typically your stands are going to be set up for bow anyway. And maybe you just have a couple spots that now open up. Okay, I got an 80-yard shot here, or a 150-yard shot. Oh, okay, well, now I'm sitting on this field edge, but now I can shoot into the field and not just, as they're skirting this edge. So, in Indiana, up until, I'm going to say crossbows went legal sometime around like 2010-ish, and around 2015 is when the rifle thing started to open up. And as we typically hear, it's going to be the end of the deer herd. That was already trending downward with the massive doe tags opening up and that sort of thing. So it's that wasn't the reason for any of it. You've seen lower harvest numbers in recent years when there's more weapons, more efficient weapons with which to hunt them. It's the size of the deer herd all the way back to the doe tag explosion.
Yeah, I've gone into depth on that, and anybody who wants to argue, we can argue. But we're going to talk about optics. You're with Riton Optics now. A very fascinating company, I think, because it's not that old. I think they started 11 years ago. Brady Speth.
Yep, the Brady was the original owner of the company. Started at roughly a decade ago, and there have been some ownership changes, and there's been some like kind of change of direction. I'm the marketing guy, right? So I'm always you always inherit something different. You're like, okay, well, that's not necessarily how I would do it, and we see that kind of change happen with marketing in general. But they've always been headquartered in Arizona, so they've always kind of had more of the hunting that they did always kind of tended toward more more
Mule
towards
deer,
Western
elk,
hunting,
yep.
that kind of stuff. And a lot of the roots were more in some of the long range and tactical applications, more so than some of the hunting stuff. So they've made that evolution of introducing some more hunting specific options in recent years, but we're still working on kind of building out those lines and filling some of those gaps over the last year or so, and just putting it in a slightly different position, because that's the tricky part about optics in general is, you know, if I go work for 511, we know what those shirts and those pants are for. That's a tactical application. If I go work for Scent Blocker, we know what that clothing application is for. But a rifle scope, it can work just as well on an AR-15. An AR-15 can shoot 350 Legend or 30-06, or, you know, it can be a hunting platform, but it can also be a tactical and home defense platform where you may want something different out of your optic. But it's tough to pigeonhole optics quite the same way. There's some features that you want to maybe spin a little more towards hunting, but in terms of the job that they do, that you kind of have to be everything to everyone when you're developing optical products.
Which I find fascinating because, I mean, I'll admit, and I don't want to give you a bigger head than you already have. I'm kidding. Kind of. You've taught me a lot about optics, and you've taught me about the optic industry because you've done it for such a long time. But I'll admit, I didn't know about Riton till it wasn't that long ago. Mm-hmm. And when I looked at the products, they're lower priced. I mean, some of this stuff is, you know, I actually wrote down the price. Some of this stuff, $300 mm-hmm. for a scope, and it's like, that's garbage. Well, I tell you what, I look at it, and the binoculars, the scopes, this is some quality stuff. Now, I'm not saying that just because you're sitting here, but what I've learned from you, Bill Cook has written a bunch of articles for us in the past. Ron Spomer has written a lot of articles for us in the past, guys who know optics. Basically, and I know we've said this before, probably on this podcast, but I think you taught me that there's only certain number of places that make glass mm-hmm. for optics and a certain number of places that make the components mm-hmm. for optics. So let's talk about that for a minute. We don't have to get into the nitty-gritty, but let's start with what makes, well, we're going to talk about hunting rifle scopes. What makes a quality hunting rifle scope? Just the guts, not the special features that you guys do, but what if I'm picking up a scope, what is the main thing?
What really matters? And what really matters is, I'll run up to that just real quick to, I always liken it to pickup trucks, right? There are only so many engine block forges on Earth. And this thought that, well, Dodge is casting their engines here. Like, if you go far enough back, whether it's computers, phones, scopes, trucks, tree stands, bows, at some point you're going to get to a supply pinch point where there's only a certain number of places that make this thing right. that I need to make this. You know, building optics is not something you can just decide, I'm going to open an optics company and start building scopes in my garage. It's if people really understood, go right now to Google, find a picture of a scope cut in half, because this looks like a simple device. Go find one that's cut in half and see all the intricacy of what's in there. You only see two pieces of glass, one at the eyepiece and one on the objective. There are, in some cases, dozens of lenses within an optical system from point A to point B. So there are only a few places in the world that can do that. What's different from one brand to the next is the specific constellation of features and benefits that ultimately end up creating the finished product. And you can start with the exact same materials and build it in a different configuration and have a wildly different experience with that end product than you would any other way. But the same thing holds true with optics as it does many other things. It's gotten really tough to buy a true lemon. You know, we can talk about firearms too. It's not that long ago that as recently as the 70s, which isn't as recent as it seems, because I still think that was 30 years ago, and it was not.
It was a lot more. Trust me, I'm older than you.
But you used to be able to go buy a 22 revolver. They called them Saturday Night Specials for a reason, because they were $50.
They're cheap, yeah.
And they were legit they were almost disposable. And a lot of things were that way. And as manufacturing has evolved and refined and just gotten better, to literally go buy a gun that's not serviceable now is almost impossible. Like
it's a good point.
The cheapest handgun, you go buy and you'll have people that'll say, oh, they're junk, a $239 Sky CPX-2. A CPX-1 was my carry gun when I was a poor, broke, recent college grad. I've had that gun for 15 years. It's got 5,000 rounds through it. I have no problems with that gun. If I needed to use that gun in a self-defense situation, I would not trust that gun. And everything is that way. Bows used to be that way. It's tough to legitimately buy a bad bow now.
You're right.
Is not what it was 30 years ago.
You're right.
You can't find junk. We've weeded all of that out. The consumers have gotten, we're all more educated in theory, smarter consumers than we've ever been. That has required that brands raise their game.
that level of quality
baseline quality has come up.
So that's what I've been saying is that, like, just for your average hunter, you can buy a $299 scope, and you don't have to cringe anymore that, oh, this is going to be a piece of crap and I'm going to quote unquote shoot it out. I defy anybody to show me a gun, a scope that they've actually shot out, because they're not running that.
You'll shoot a barrel out before you shoot a scope.
Yes, one of today's. With the way these things are built. And then I like your analogy with compound bows, because they'll say, well, what's the difference between this $400 compound bow and this $1,600 compound bow? And I'm going to argue it's the same as it is with this optics. If you shoot archery, because that's my thing, if you shoot archery enough, you're going to know the difference. And it's actually going to help you. If I'm just sitting there shooting 20 yards into a bale of hay, okay, fine. You actually go buy that, probably get a lesson in that. But if I'm shooting 3D, or if I'm not the long range guy, but if I want to be that way,
do some practice at 80 or 100 yards.
And then I'm adding in quality arrows and all that kind of stuff. Deer Talk Now is brought to you by Wildlife Research Center and the new Golden Rope Scent Rope Kit. The kit comes with 4 ounces of Golden Rope Scent Concentrate, 3 cable ties, and 3 scent ropes made of proprietary fibers meant to absorb the maximum amount of scent. Simply saturate the rope in your scent of choice, hang it from a branch, and watch the trail cam photos come flying in. For more information, go to wildlife.com. I know that you guys have some new ones for this year, but I want to back up first. The other thing with Riton is you don't have a crazy number of what we say SKUs. You've got maybe a dozen.
No, I mean, we've got right at, I want to say around 40.
Is it that many?
40 to 45. Because
I was looking at the 3 families. Like, basically, if for a hunt, well, actually, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 families, Primal and Conquer.
Right. So the way the Riton product line breaks down, everything falls into a family and a series. So we've got our families, which are Primal, which is our hunt line, our Conquer, which is our long range line, and then we've got Tactics, which is like red dots and LPVOs and that kind of thing. And like I said, there are applications across. Optics have to be everything to everybody. You could take that 1 to 10 and put it on a 450 Bushmaster AR and it'd be a great hog gun. The reticle is more designed for maybe some tactical applications, but still work for hunting. But yeah, so Primal, I think there's about 15 SKUs in Primal right now, 10-ish in Conquer, 10 to 15 in Tactics by the time you roll in some
I
of the
didn't get
red
that
dots
far
and
into
that
because
kind of
that's
stuff.
making more sense now.
And then within those families, we've got different series, 1, 3, 5, sometimes 7. So like our 7 Conquer series, those are, when you start talking about, okay, then what differentiates? Here's a $400 scope. Here's a $1,500 scope. What differentiates those? When we draw the comparison you just made to archery, They both have glass. They're both an aluminum tube. But that one series is just standard HD glass, your standard coatings.
Let's talk about that. So let's talk about what is standard HD glass and how, and then step us up to the various upgrades.
So if we rewind, say 50 years, and you go buy a rifle combo and it came with that scope that was on top of it, and you looked through it and it felt like there was an amber lens on both on the glass, right? Everything was very yellow, very dingy. If you're going to be in a scope at that end of the spectrum, if you know what you're looking for, and I make that point specifically because, like you're talking about with archery, if you're just going to go shoot a bale of hay at 20 yards to bow hunt in a spot where you know you're never shooting more than 30, you probably can't find the weaknesses in that optical system, because a 3 to 9, a 4 to 12, even a 3 to 15, like, that's not extreme long distance, etc. And that's where the weaknesses start to show up in optics. Something like spherical aberration. When we look at the world, it's flat, essentially. But the lenses of a scope are round. So when you want to look at flat things through round glass and you're bending light and you're bringing it in, if you know what you're looking for, and if you've got binoculars or a rifle scope, you listen to this podcast, pick it up, go outside, find a telephone pole. And then you look through an optical system, the very best picture you're going to get is in the center of that optical system. So in a binocular, do you look at something and put it on the edge of the image? Or when I'm looking at the antlers, do I want the antlers in the center of the image? You put them in the center of the image. Same. That's why the reticle is in the center of the image. That's where your picture is the best. When you look at it that way, that pole is straight. Now, move left or right and take that telephone pole over to the edge of that field of view. And if you know what you're looking for in more inexpensive, I won't say cheap because I'm in marketing, so we don't say dirty words like cheap, in more inexpensive, affordable optics, you can sometimes start to see that telephone pole move from a straight pole to a curve. It starts to pull to the edge of the glass. That's called spherical aberration. Some people can't see it even when you tell them what to look for. Do you look at deer at the edge of or do you look at the middle? When you shoot, are you shooting at the edge or are you shooting at the middle? And if all you're doing is shooting 100 yards or 25 yards for bow hunting, are you ever going to push that to the limits of its capabilities to where, well, no, I need extra low dispersion glass that has better color reproduction, that's dielectrically coated and does a better job with flat field technology to look 50 yards and see if that deer's a shooter through the brush and then ultimately shoot it? No. Now, go to the other end of the spectrum. You are a competitive long-range rifle shooter shooting at distances that are most often used. The Olympics are going on right now to describe track and field events, right? 1,000 meters, 1,500 meters, a mile. Are you doing that kind of thing? Okay. Now you're going to have things like chromatic aberration show up. You're going to have vignetting. You're going to have mirage. You're going to have all these things that, if all you plan to do with this scope is hunt, you literally can't recreate a situation in your day-to-day of that product where you need an optic that starts to try to correct for those things. So it always goes back to, what's the use case? Like, people typically ask the wrong question when they start shopping for optics. And, I've done optics for a long time, either the full-time job and then obviously writing. So I get asked by people, okay, what should I buy? And their question is always this: I just bought a 30-06. What scope should I put on it?
Yep.
I don't know.
Right.
Because those aren't the relevant questions. Because you could be using that 30-06 to go on a New Mexico elk hunt. Once in a lifetime tag draw, New Mexico elk. You might be looking at 500-yard shots very realistically on that hunt. You might also tell me, I'm going to Quebec for a bear hunt. 30-06 still works in both. That's a valid rifle choice in both of those scenarios. Just for hunting. We've even talked about, I just bought a 6.5 Creedmoor. Okay, great. Well, did you buy it in a Ruger Precision rifle, or did you buy it in a whatever, a Ruger American Gen 2? Those are not the same rifle designed for the same purpose. My question is always, what are you going to do with this?
Right.
I'm going to hunt. I'm going to be at the range with it. It's going to be kind of a crossover thing. And then what's my budget? What are you going to use it for? How much do you want to spend? Because spending more is always great, right? If I have the choice between the Altima or the Corvette, all things being equal, if you're just going to give me one of them, I want the Corvette.
Sure.
It's worth more. It has more value over time. But am I using it to drive my kids to school every day? Or am I using it to go be a road course racer?
Mm-hmm.
The
excellent questions.
The application changes the answer.
Excellent questions, and it's an excellent way of looking at it, because even today, I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years. Even today, it's the same thing. They say the caliber. I bought XYZ caliber. What kind of scope should I buy? Well, what kind of hunting are you doing? Mm-hmm. Well, I deer hunt, here at home, and my shots are 100 yards. But someday I might want to go elk hunting. Well, okay.
You're going to have to buy a new rifle.
You're going to have to buy a new rifle, or, like you said, you've got to, that would be like buying that Corvette to take your kids to school on the off chance that someday you might be, I can't remember the other example you used, but like, that's like, I want to,
I need something to get my kids to
I
school
want a
every day,
Corvette
but I might
with
want
a-
to go drag race on the
with
weekends.
a bottle opener on. I mean, it's like,
There's
there's not a Swiss Army knife for it.
Exactly.
When you were talking about, there's my Brad Fenson. He loves it when I say that, about. That's my Canadian accent for all you northern listeners.
And I say that's your Wisconsin accent.
It's
for
my
all of us
Wisconsin
Indiana
accent,
people.
and I completely get it. People say you're either from Wisconsin or Canada. I'm like, how do you know?
Uh-huh.
And then they say, do you have cheese curds? Yeah, okay, you're from Wisconsin.
Uh-huh.
Where was I going with this? Glass. You were talking about glass. And is the curing process still the thing with glass, or has that been?
It's honestly, the coating.
Is it the coatings now?
coatings is what.
So technology's kind of caught up with that.
And it honestly, that portion hasn't gotten a lot, in my opinion. Ask somebody else and they'll tell you different. I don't think the quality of glass largely has changed really in the last 20 years. About 20 years ago is when we kind of saw the code get cracked for coating glass.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the big step up to where
And it's kind of hit a spot.
The garbage stuff kind of all went away 20,
Yep.
25 years ago. And now everybody's like, this is not what I thought a $200 scope looked like. And it's because that technology got better, that code got cracked, and that baseline of what we decided was acceptable for a scope went from here to here.
So before that was the deal, wasn't it? Like, it was like how long they cured that glass dictated how good that glass or that scope was going to be eventually.
Some of it had to do with the specific silicas that were used, like what was the mix used for the glass. Because like I talk about optics, there's consumer grade and then there's boutique. And Riton is most of the brands that most of us are ever going to use are what I call consumer grade.
Mm-hmm.
Boutique is Swarovski. When you start getting when you start talking about European glass versus Asian glass, whether that's Chinese or Japanese, there's a different level there. And that you see that reflected in the price tag of, do you need a $600 pair of binoculars or do you need a $4,000 pair of binoculars?
So is that the two places where glass is pretty much made?
Pretty much.
Asia and Europe.
And some of the boutique stuff, Europe.
Really?
But
anything made here?
I'm not aware of any optical glass.
You guys put all your scopes together here, though, right?
No.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
No.
They design them here.
We design a lot of it here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But again, we don't build optical systems here, so we're not necessarily always designing optical systems here. We're working on putting together that constellation and working with engineers to build those things out, which is really kind of where the vast majority of where brands land now. The days of made in the, if you look at optics and look for made in the USA, optics. It doesn't exist anymore.
And well, most products you can't find anything, but optics is that niche.
Even the componentry of, like, even if they're assembled here, there's a reason it doesn't say made anymore, is because even the components, it would be like, okay, well, they built my Toyota Tundra in Texas, but where did the parts come from? And a lot, they come from a lot of different places. So.
You talked about, there's so many questions, we're not going to get to them all today, but aircraft grade aluminum, is there anything else that a scope is made with?
No. Everything
all made with that.
Yep. Usually it's 60-61. Some of the red dots, you'll see some 70-75 stuff. Rings will sometimes be steel, or whether it's 60-61 aluminum or 70-75, but the weight is the big thing.
This new one here is this? No, that's not. Is that the one?
That's the lightweight.
This thing is how heavy?
Just over 20 ounces.
And this is the new.
This is the 3 primal 3-15 lightweight. So
you guys, if you guys haven't seen these, just go to your. Are they in retail stores?
They will. By the time this airs, they should be starting to show up in retail. Worst case scenario, obviously, you can go see the details at.
You have to check. They're really cool. I mean, very lightweight and impressive to look through. The thing that I was really impressed with was this pair of binoculars. Mm-hmm. When I put that thing up, I'm like, okay, I am a normal guy. Working in this industry,
I've sent you multiple pairs of
binoculars from other companies, and I've had some of the super high-end thousands of dollars. I can't tell the difference. Mm-hmm. But again, I'm a bow hunter who gun hunts, who shoots, okay, I do have a 500-yard shot to my credit, but
but that's the vast majority.
I can't tell the difference.
It's the vast majority of folks.
I can't tell the difference. Now, for glassing binoculars, now I've hunted Wyoming and Montana and Oregon. That was probably the most I've ever been on a pair of binoculars was in Oregon, and I can't say I've ever gotten fatigue, and they talk about it, but I don't know. And I know, like you said, it's kind of plateaued over the past 10, 15 years. But what they've done to binoculars, because back in the day when we did have a crappy pair of binoculars, it's like I can't look at this anymore. I'd get headaches from it.
And if I'm telling tales out of school, or if I'm making this up, by all means call me out on it. But I'm pretty sure I showed you how to properly set up a pair of binoculars.
Yes, you did.
And that's another thing that. And I've said this for years. I've worked in this category before. The delta, the difference between what the average person knows about optics and what they actually know is greater than any other category in this industry. Primarily because optics is the thing people won't say they don't know anything about. Mm-hmm. If you aren't a ballistic geek and you're not into reloading and whatever, you're happy to say, I just want to go to the store and I want to buy ammo and I want it to work. I'm not a ballistics guy. If, I'm this way, I can shoot a bow plenty well enough to go hunt. I have no interest earthly at all in, well, what if I do a quarter turn of this? And what if I spit on the wax before I put it on? And if I'm going to change the helical on my arrow by a quarter of a degree, I'm not, no. Don't care. I'm not a bow jockey. People are happy to say all of that. When you say, do you know anything about optics? The answer is always, yeah. And that is the answer if you bought a scope 30 years ago and mounted it, or you're an optical engineer. Everyone, well, yeah. Nobody says I don't know anything about optics. One of the favorite things I've ever written, I wrote for DDH, and it was talking about the trade-off in optics.
That's right. That was a great piece.
And
we have to reprint that, by the way.
It's
you don't get paid for it, by the way.
Everyone wants a 1:30 by 24 scope that weighs 8 ounces and is 10 inches long. Yep. Everybody wants that. The reality of optical physics does not allow that to be the case. I've got a few hard and fast rules when it comes to optics, and one of them is more magnification will typically cause more problems than it solves. The higher the magnification, the bigger your scope. That's more weight. The higher the magnification, the more likely you are to be at an exit pupil setting. Exit pupil, for those that don't know, is essentially, quick and dirty math, your objective lens divided by the magnification that you're on, and it is the number one determining factor of low light performance. Scopes don't collect light. Like, that's one of the things that makes me just want to like push ice picks into my eardrums when I hear people say it. The scopes don't, while you're sitting in the tree stand at 4:30, you don't have little scope fairies that run around putting light in coin purses and coming back and sitting, waiting for when it's dark to then go, oh, but I have all this light that I collected an hour ago. That's not how it works. They can only work with the light that exists right then and there. And that's another one of those kind of on the margin things that light transmission for everything is above 90% at this point. But the exit pupil is what determines low light performance. And keeping that exit pupil above 4 millimeters is what makes you able to see when it matters. It's why the 3 to 9 by 40 for years and years and years and years has been the gold standard of hunting optics, because even when Bubba cranks that all the way up to 9, his exit pupil is 4.33. He can't do anything to that scope to not be able to see in a low light condition. But now you have, well, I need a 4 to 16, and they crank it to 16 with a 44 millimeter objective. You got a 2-point, math is dumb, something exit pupil. It's not going to perform as a 3. You're not going to see as well with that as you are a 3 to 9. You just aren't. It's a trade-off. Do you prairie dog hunt with this rifle? Yeah, I'm not taking it deer hunting. Great. Buy the 6 to 24 by 50, because exit pupil doesn't matter. You're shooting it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, high prairie, lots of light gathering, light transmission, not a consideration for that scope. I'm going bear hunting in the Adirondacks, overbait, deep evergreen forest. You're going to want an illuminated reticle. You're going to want an exit pupil that you can keep high no matter where you are in that setting. Everything's a trade-off.
Because your shot is going to be in low light.
If you want it to be, if you want your scope to be light, you're going to have to give up something. If you want your scope to have high magnification, you're going to have to give up something. It's just whatever choice you make, there's always a trade-off of, if this is your number one determining factor of performance that you want out of this scope, there's something else you have to give up to make that the focus of the optic.
That's a great refresher. Like I said, we'll put a link to that article. I think we have it online, back up there. Well, I think that runs us through, Trent. Like I said, this is always a pleasure. You're such a encyclopedia of this stuff. I don't remember it. You know me. I'm a simple guy. But we appreciate it. And if people want to find out more about Riton, where can they go?
Obviously, go to ritonoptics.com. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. Of course, everyone hates us because we make gun accessories and stuff. So you got to go looking for us a little bit. You got to
go looking for it. And we got to be careful how we do it, too. But it's hunting optics, what I'm pushing here. So hopefully that helps. And the new product, you did touch about it, but what can people look for this year? Yeah, so specifically on the hunting side of things, by the time this airs, the 5 primal 2 to 12 IR. So this took kind of one of a more long rangey reticle. Love that from a hunting perspective. That 2 to 12 is a fantastic optical range. You got 2 for on the low power, 12. We talked about trade-off. You don't need 12 to shoot. Like, you can shoot 12 power at 400 yards all day. You should be able to do that. If you can't, you shouldn't be shooting 400 yards to begin with. Just a simple, straightforward, it's our RDH illuminated center dot reticle, 30 millimeter tube, cap turrets, that is hunter deluxe there. That's the 5 primal 2 to 12 IR. And then we've got the 3 primal 3 to 15 lightweight. That's got more of a BDC type reticle in it. You got a couple holdover points in there, more for the, trying to save weight. You're hiking, kind of a Western hunting type thing. 20 ounces, again, 30 millimeter tube.
and that's the 3 Primal 3 to 15 lightweight. And then we've got our 5 Primal binoculars.
These are awesome. I'm using these in Wyoming here in 3 weeks. Well, actually, by the time this airs, it's going to be like within a week. But they're great. They're perfect.
We've got those in 8 or 10 power, and stay tuned for some news about some additional binoculars potentially coming into the mix in the next couple weeks.
They also have spotting scopes.
We've got pistol red dots. We've got spotting scopes. We've got LPVOs.
That was my point. Is like, cure your problems. Just go buy another gun.
Exactly.
And then you'll be set up. This is my long range deal. This is my everyday deal. Okay, Trent Marsh, thank you so much joining us for Deer Talk Now. You guys check it out. The only thing we ask you, again, like and subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast or whether you're watching this podcast. You can watch them on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. On YouTube, it is youtube.com/ddhonline.com. For Trent Marsh, I am Dan Schmidt. Thank you again. We will drop another brand new episode of Deer Talk Now next Thursday.